Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez, and you can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create the cinematic effect using color grading techniques in Photoshop. But this video will be so much more than that. This is going to be a comprehensive guide into color grading. We'll discuss the color schemes that are traditionally used in film and why those colors are used. I'll then go through the different tools that you can use to apply the color grade. We'll also take time to learn how to color correct an image because it's really important to use images without color casts when applying color grades. Okay, let's get started with the tutorial. First of all, what is color grading? You can think of color grading as a creative color correction. It adds a color theme or color palette to an image or video to help you tell a story. Color grading is a term usually reserved for film, but these days a lot of people are using that term in photography as well. What we're going to do today is recreate the look of a summer blockbuster film on a photograph. First, let's take a look at this color wheel. Yellows, oranges, reds, and magentas are usually where you find the skin tones, and the complementary colors are the greens, teals, cyans, and blues. If you don't have a color wheel, you can simply go to color.adobe.com and you can use the color wheel there. And you can click on complementary, and if you find a color that is similar to a skin tone, like this one here, you'll notice the opposite colors are in this range here, the cool colors, like this blue color here. And no matter what skin tone you select, you'll see that the complementary color is any one of these greens, teals, cyans, and blues. Let's look at some movie stills so that you can see the effect that we're going for and how it relates to these complementary colors. And I guess that I should warn you before we get started. After looking at these examples, it will be very difficult for you not to notice this color scheme every time you look at a movie. But I'm sure that is worth it because it'll help you create better color grades on your images. The first movie still we're going to look at is of the movie Terminator Genisys. And this is perhaps the most popular movie look. This is a teal-orange or blue-orange combination. There's a teal tint, mostly in the shadows, and an orange color in the highlights, mostly in the skin tones. This combination is used because these colors are complementary colors. And as you know, when complementary colors are put side by side, they pop and they stand out. In this case, they make the actor stand out. Here's another example of the same color scheme. In the movie Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation, the teal-orange is used to make the actor stand out in this action sequence. The movie Wonder Woman has a great example of how the actor's skin tones are not affected by the blues and teals, even in a cold and dark environment. Notice how there's a lot of shadows in this scene, but the shadows on her skin do not have that blue-teal tint. This effect is not only found in action scenes or dark scenes. This still from the movie Jurassic World shows the same color combination in a bright room. This still from the movie Justice League shows the opposite. A really dark room where the actors' faces are bright with the orange tint. In the background, even though it's extremely dark, it has blues and teals in it. This combination is also found in scenes where there are no actors. The movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has this effect on a shot of New York City. Teals in the darks and oranges in the lights. Although this color effect can work on certain movies or certain scenes, it can be overdone. In my opinion, 2007's Transformers went way too far with this effect. The orange and the skin tones are pushed way too far, and everything else is way too blue. I think that this movie would look much better if they had desaturated the colors just a little bit. Now, this is of course not the only color combination. This still from the movie The Hobbit shows a similar color effect, but it uses greens in the dark areas. Usually the skin tones remain somewhat natural in most of these color effects. The movie The Matrix, however, has an exaggerated green tint to it. The skin tones actually do have some of that green tint. And it works because it pushes the story forward. It's part of it. They're inside of a computer simulation. And that's the point of color grading. You're telling a story with the colors that you apply to your image or film. This is a good time to point out and stress that there are no rules as to what colors should be used or how they should be used. This is up to you and the story that you're trying to convey by adding the color grade. We've been talking about the popular teal-orange effect, which is the effect that we're going to try to replicate in Photoshop, but as you saw in the Matrix still, this is not the only color combination to use. For example, the movie Amelie uses the complementary colors green and red. green in the shadows, and red in the highlights and skin tones. Mad Max uses a monochromatic color grade throughout most of the film. Terminator Salvation uses grays and very little saturation. This is the second still from a Terminator movie that we use. It's not only because Terminator is one of my favorite movie franchises, but it uses colors in different ways to convey different stories. Genesis is set, for the most part, before Judgment Day, the apocalypse, while Salvation is only set after the destruction of the world, so it makes sense that they would use a gray and desaturated color grade for this film. Again, another example of how color pushes the story that they're trying to convey. A color grade is nothing more than a creative color correction. Its only purpose is to help you tell a story. Sometimes the color grade can change within the same scene. In the movie Limitless, the main character dramatically increases his intelligence by taking a pill, and 2 different color grades are applied depending on his state of mind. The movie has a cold and desaturated look when he is of average intelligence, and it becomes a hot, bright yellow when the pill NZT turns him into a genius. You can actually see this color grade change on screen. Everything goes from cold to hot in an instant, and it's supposed to represent how his newfound intelligence makes him see everything so much brighter and clearly. This is why I ended with this screenshot. I hope that this 6-minute explanation helps you see and understand color grading and color themes more clearly, and that these examples give you ideas of how you can color grade your images with the techniques that I'm about to show you. When applying a color grade to your photo, you have to be sure that the image that you're using does not have a color cast. Ideally, you should be working with neutral grays. This is not a color correction tutorial, but since color correcting is so important for color grading, we'll take a few minutes to do a basic color correction just in case your image requires it. So if we want to apply the cinematic color effect to this image, we would first have to remove the green color cast, and one of the easiest ways of removing a color cast is with the curves adjustment layer. So with this curves adjustment layer, we're just going to apply a quick color correction. The curves adjustment layer allows you to edit the RGB composite, that is the entire image as a whole, or to use the RGB channels to make adjustments to each individual channel, red, green, and blue. I'm gonna click on the curves adjustment layer, and we're gonna work with these eyedroppers here. So let's start by clicking on this top eyedropper, which helps us set the black point, and then click and drag on this triangle over to the right. Notice how the image gets darker. What we want to do is figure out where the darkest point of the image is. So I'm going to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and click. You'll see these weird colors, and that's okay. I'm still holding Alt, Option on the Mac. I'm going to click and drag over to the right. Notice that at a certain point, I'm going to get black. Once I start getting black, that means that those are the darkest points of my image. So you'll see the front tire get some black in those areas there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release the key, and with the black point eyedropper selected, I'm going to click in the areas where we had black here in the front tire. So I'm going to click, and that sets my black point. I'm going to do the same thing for the white point. So I'm going to click on the white point eyedropper right down here, hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and click and drag this triangle to the left. And once you start seeing white, that will be the brightest point of the image. Now be careful when you're setting your white point. Make sure that you don't set a specular highlight. Make sure that it's a white that should have some detail. So in this case, it's probably right here in this area. So I'm going to click there to set my white point, and notice how much better the image looks. Now we got to set our neutral gray. So we got to click on this eyedropper here in the middle, which sets our gray point. And we just got to click anywhere on the image that we think will be a neutral gray. In this case, we can just simply click on the white here on this truck. This should be a neutral color. So I'm just going to click here, and notice how much better the image looks just by applying those quick adjustments. We actually did this color correction the longer way. There's shorter ways of doing it, but I wanted to show you the long way so that you understand what the curves adjustment layer is doing behind the scenes. So with the curves adjustment layer selected, I can click on this icon right here, and it just resets it. So all the adjustments that we made are now gone. Now let me show you how to do this much quicker. Adobe likes to hide all the good menus on the flyout menu right down here, this 4 little line icon. Notice that all the panels have it. There's a lot of good options there, so always go in there and click around and see what you find. One of the options that is hidden here is the auto options right here. Another way of getting to it is by holding Alt, Option on the Mac, and clicking on the Auto button here, which brings up the Auto Color Correction options. And notice what happens when I click on Fine Dark and Light Colors. It color corrects the image almost as we had it before. Photoshop did what we did automatically. It found the dark and light points. So I'm going to press OK. And then the other thing we can do is simply click on the eyedropper tool to set the gray point and just click here where we did before. So obviously that was much faster, but I wanted you to understand how the tool works rather than telling you to click a whole bunch of buttons. And this next example is going to show you how you can determine what type of color cast your image has. I'm going to open up this group, but I'm also going to delete the curves adjustment layer that we created since we don't need it anymore. And I'm going to disable this layer that contains the truck. And then we have these gradients here. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit just so we can see them a little bit better in our screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the info panel. So I'm going to go into Window, Info. And that's our info panel here. Notice that when I hover over the image, numbers appear. We have RGB, red, green, and blue. Those are the values of each individual channel. So if I come over into the gradient here in the center, notice how all the values are the same. RGB, no matter where I hover over, the values are exactly the same. That means that all the levels of each individual channel are the same. We have a neutral gray all across this gradient. If we look at the gradient to the right of that, notice that the red channel has a larger value than the other two channels, no matter where I hover over the gradient. So for example, in this point here, I have red of 221, green of 213, and blue of 208. That means that we have a red color cast on this particular gradient. If I hover over the gradient here to the right, you'll notice the same thing, but in this case, the blue channel has a higher value, 177, 185, and 197. So when you're working on your image, just hover over an area that should be a neutral gray and look at those values. If one of the values is much, much higher than the other, then you probably have a color cast in that particular color. Going back into the image of the truck, if we hover over this white area here, notice the RGB values. Red of 122, green of 177, and blue of 122. Obviously, there's a big green color cast in this image. So now I'm going to click on this tab so we can work on the image that we're going to apply the color grade to. And notice that this is an image with neutral grays. If I hover over the pillar here, you can see the RGB 139, 137, and 132. They're not equal, but they're close enough. So that means that there is no color cast. I can also move and hover over his suit. 61, 62, and 66. Again, there is no channel that dominates any of the others, so this image has no color cast. Obviously, if I hover over the yellow here, the blue is going to be really low because the opposite of yellow is blue. That means that there's not a lot of blue in this channel, but this is not a neutral gray. So keep that in mind. You always got to hover over something that should be a neutral gray. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a curves adjustment layer. You don't really need to delete the masks on these curves adjustment layers, but I'm going to just because I think that it keeps my layers panel with a little less clutter and it makes it easier for you to see, but you don't have to delete them. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make an extreme adjustment here, and I want you to see something. Notice how this adjustment not only changed the luminosity of the image, it also changed the colors of the image. When working in Photoshop, I prefer to have more control. I prefer to have the colors and the luminance separate so I can control them separately. So with curves, you're adjusting both. But if we switch the normal blend mode to something else, we can control color and luminosity individually. So first, I'm going to change the blend mode to luminosity and notice what happens. The luminance values are higher, but the colors are not saturated. So I'm going to go back and change it to normal. Look at the face here. Look at the red here in the pillars. They're way too saturated, but if I change the blend mode to luminosity, I can make this extreme luminosity adjustment, but the colors are left intact. So that's what we want to do. I'm going to click on this icon here to reset that curve, and I'm going to rename it luminosity so that we know what that adjustment layer controls. So I'm going to go ahead and just make an adjustment to this. So I'm going to click and drag this point down and click and drag this point up just to create a little bit of contrast. And that looks pretty good, so I'm gonna leave that there. And I guess that this is a good time to point out that as you follow this tutorial with your own images, you shouldn't try to duplicate the shape of my curve or enter the same numerical values that I do on the different adjustments. You gotta remember that your images are gonna be different. They're gonna have different tonal ranges, different colors, and any adjustment that I make, if you duplicate that exactly, it will probably have a different effect on your image. So what you need to do is look at the adjustments that I make and use them as reference, and then make the appropriate adjustments so that it looks good on your image. So what you need to do now is create a new curves adjustment layer. And I'm gonna delete the layer mask. And you guessed it, this is gonna control the color. So I'm gonna go into one of these channels. I'll choose red just for this example, and I'm gonna make an extreme color adjustment. Notice that this brightens up the image. Again, we're controlling both color and luminosity. But if we change the blend mode from normal to color, we only control the colors. Watch what happens when I click and drag this point down. I don't make the image darker in the opposite color, in this case cyan, I simply add the color. But if I change the blend mode back to normal, notice that the image gets darker. So leave this adjustment layer set to color and click on this icon here to reset the curve. And of course, I'll rename the layer and call it color so that we know what it controls. Now, before we continue, I'm actually going to create one more curves adjustment layer just to explain a couple things. This one's set to normal, so it's going to control both luminosity and color, but it's going to help me explain how the curves adjustment layer works. So we have this point here, and I can click and move that point around to make adjustments to the image. That there is the black point, as represented by the gradient right below it. You can think of this horizontal gradient as the before point and this vertical gradient as the after point. So currently, the black point, as you can see right from the gradient below it, is black. But if we click and drag that up, it's no longer black. Now it's this shade of gray here to the left. The same thing is true for this point up here. Notice how it's white here at the bottom, but if I click and drag it down, it's no longer white. Now it's this shade of dark gray. So by dragging these points up or down, we add light to the image. So I can create a new point, and I can click and drag it down to take away light, and click and drag it up to add light. You can think of it as a dimmer switch like what you may have at home. You can subtract light and add light as you drag the dimmer switch up or down. We also have the individual channels. Let's start with the red channel. I can add light, in this case, the color of the channel, which is red, or I can reduce light, which will subtract the color of the channel and add the opposite color of the channel, in this case, cyan. Notice that line that runs across the curves panel here. If a point is above that line, it's going to add light in that color. Again, red. If a point is below that line, it's going to take away the channel's color and add the opposite color, in this case, cyan. If you don't see that line, you can click on this icon here and go into the curve displays options and make sure that the baseline is enabled. You can see how it sort of appears and reappears there. Now I've been mentioning that there's an opposite color to every channel. Red's opposite color is cyan, green's opposite color is magenta, and blue's opposite color is yellow. And those are very important for you to remember so that you know which channel controls what color and how to move them accordingly. Now, if you don't remember what the opposite color of each channel is, simply go into the info panel. Red, green, and blue. Right across from that, you have cyan, green. Right across from that, you have magenta, blue. Right across from that, you have yellow. I created this graphic, which you can find on my website, photoshoptrainingchannel.com. Look for the link right below this video to take you directly there. I will also include it in the download for this tutorial. And while you're at my website downloading this image and the other tutorial assets, don't forget to check out my courses. I have a beginner's Photoshop course, a compositing course, and a few others, so check them out. But anyway, I'm going to delete this curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to continue working with the color curves adjustment layer that we created earlier. And we're going to start working with the red channel. And if you remember, the movie look effect that we're going for includes the blue, teal in the darks, and the orange in the light colors, especially in skin tones. So what I can do is I can click and drag this point. If we go under the line, we take away the color of this channel, in this case red, and we add the opposite, cyan. So notice how the darks are now getting that cyan color. Now we can click and drag this point to the right, and then click and drag this point to the left, the lights. Notice the skin colors, they're getting redder. Now we can work this way, and there's actually a better, easier way to work. We can click on this icon here, this direct selection tool, so we can get this eyedropper and we can hover over the image. Notice that as I hover over the image, there's a circle going up and down that line. That's telling us what value is directly under what I'm hovering. So I can come into any one of these points. So maybe here, click and drag down to add cyan, and then come into the face and click and drag up and add red. And notice that by making that simple adjustment, we already created a very convincing movie look effect. Now I can go into the other different channels to continue working on the image. I can go into the green channel and I can click on the skin tones, click and drag down to take away green because I want to add a little bit of magenta. And then on the darks, I can click and drag up to add a little bit of green. If I go into the blue channel, I can do the same. I can click on any one of these dark areas and drag up to add blue. On the face, I can click and drag down to take away blue and add a little bit of yellow. And as simple as that, we created the teal-orange color effect in Photoshop. Now this effect is not complete. We can actually continue working on it. So a couple of things that I want to show you is just a few shortcuts to make it easier to work for you. So I'm going to go back into the red channel and notice how we created these points. You can actually see what point is selected, the point that's filled in. That means that we can now control that point. You can click and drag on them as you've seen me do already, or you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move them up or down, left or right. So I can move this up, or I can move it down, left, or right. You can use the plus or minus keys to move between points. So notice how I'm pressing the plus key right now to go up the line, and I can press the minus key to go down the line. So I can select the point at the bottom and then drag up to take away some of that cyan, or drag it down to add more of that cyan. So this is how you would make those fine adjustments. Sometimes it's a little harder to control if you're using a mouse, and even a little bit harder to control if you're using a Wacom tablet. Sometimes you click and drag more than you intend. And actually, these kind of Photoshop tips, these little tidbits, they're the kind that I show on my daily Photoshop tip. I have a daily Photoshop tip on all my social media accounts, so check me out on Facebook, Pinterest, Google+, and all the others. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, then once a week, I send you a recap of the previous week's Photoshop tips. And it's all a whole bunch of stuff like this, hidden shortcuts and things like that. But anyway, another thing that you may want to do is go back into the luminosity layer. And now that you know that you can select this button here, you can click on it and drag on areas that are too dark. Now, I'm using this icon a lot, but every time I switch between layers, I have to select it. If I click on this icon here and select Auto Select Target Adjustment Tool, that will automatically get selected. Notice that I can switch between curves adjustment layers and it's always selected. So I'm gonna leave that on because I'm gonna keep using it. And under luminosity, I'm just gonna go in the areas that are too dark and lighten them up a bit. Maybe some areas need to be a little bit darker, so maybe click and drag this down. And one thing I want to mention is you usually don't want to have points that are too close to each other like here. So I can just click and drag one out. And the reason for that is that if you have 2 points and you drag them side by side, you're going to wash out the image and it's not going to look very good like in this area here. So it's a good idea not to have points that are too close to each other. We can continue experimenting with this image and try to get a better effect. In this case, I think this is going to be good for this example. I already achieved the effect that I was going for. And what I'm going to do now is simply put these adjustment layers into a group by holding Shift and clicking on both, then pressing Control G, Command G on the Mac, and I'm just going to call this group Curves because I applied a Curves adjustment layer. So that's before and that's after. Sometimes when you finalize your color grading, the adjustment layers on their own, they're not good enough and you just need a more targeted result. So what you can do is use other adjustment layers and use a layer mask. So I'm going to click on the Quick Selection tool. I'm going to click and drag on his face to make a selection, and then I'm going to create a new adjustment layer right above the color adjustment layer. And this is going to be a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And I can simply saturate the face more if I need to. Obviously, that's way too much. This is not the Transformers movie. And I can maybe make other adjustments if need be. In this case, they're not really necessary, but I just wanted to show you that you do have that option. Also, you can apply the hue and saturation adjustment layer as a global adjustment. So I'm going to delete the layer mask, and maybe you can bring down that saturation. So we still have those tones that we apply, but they're not as saturated. So this would be a little bit more like the Terminator Salvation movie that we looked at in the examples. So as you saw, it's not very difficult. I'm sure that you can do it on your own. And if you decide to color grade an image, upload it to Instagram and use the hashtag PTCvids. That way, when I search for that hashtag, if I see your image, I'll comment on it. But anyway, I do understand that the curves adjustment layer can be a bit intimidating for some people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to recreate this effect using other tools in Photoshop that may be a little more intuitive, that may be a little more visual. But in the end, I think the curves adjustment layer is a better tool, so I recommend learning it. But I still want to give options for those people who are just starting out. What I'm going to do now is create a different adjustment layer, selective color. And selective color allows us to select a color and add or take away a different color. So we have these colors here. So for example, the blacks. These are the dark areas of the image. I can add cyan. Notice that we have cyan here. If I click and drag to the right, we add cyan. What do you think will happen if we click and drag to the left? We'll add the opposite color. And as we know, it's red. So in the darks, we're going to add cyan. We want to take away magenta to add a little bit of green. And we want to take away yellow to add a little bit of blue. And we can actually make those darker by adding more black. In the reds, which is where the skin tones usually lie, we can take away cyan. We can add magenta, we can add yellow, we can decide to make them darker or brighter. In this case, I'll make them a little bit darker. And we can continue working with the other colors. Maybe in the neutrals, we'll add just a hint of cyan and maybe a hint of blue by taking away yellow, of course. So as you can see, we created a very similar effect using the selective color adjustment layer. Notice that this time we left it set to normal because we're adjusting the luminance values on a separate slider. Of course, we can continue and make adjustments to different colors, but I think this does a good job illustrating how this adjustment layer could create a very similar effect. There's yet another way of creating this effect with a different adjustment layer, and that's with the color balance adjustment layer. And this one helps you select shadows, midtones, and highlights and add the colors. And actually, this adjustment layer does a great job in showing you each channel's opposite color. We can start with the shadows and we can add cyan, we can add blue, and we can add green, and we create that teal effect. We can go into the highlights, add a little bit of red, a little bit of magenta, and maybe a little bit of yellow. And again, we have that same blue, teal, orange effect that we're going for. And believe it or not, there's more ways of achieving this effect. Let me disable this layer. There is something called a color lookup adjustment layer. And this adjustment layer allows you to apply lookup tables, LUT files. And LUT files are used for color grading in video. Adobe SpeedGrade, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe Premiere all use these types of files to apply color grades to videos. In Photoshop, we have some of those files built in. If you click on this drop down here, you'll see a list of color grades that we can apply. So I can select one and just scroll down the list. And you can see all these different color grades that we can apply to this image. The one that we're looking for is the teal orange plus contrast. And I'm going to click on that, and it applies the effect that we're trying to recreate. Now, I want you to notice one thing. We don't have any controls. We can't adjust the effect. We can, of course, bring down the opacity, or we can decide to use color. So we only take the colors from that adjustment layer, or maybe even the luminosity to only take the luminosity values of that adjustment layer. And we don't have a lot of control. So that's one of the reasons why I don't like to show this technique to start out with. Now, don't get me wrong, I use color lookup adjustment layers all the time, but I am aware of their limitations, so I do use blend modes and opacity to make the right adjustments when I do use them. And you can actually create color lookup adjustment layers based on the color grades that you apply with regular adjustment layers. So what I'm going to do now is select the color lookup layer, hold Shift, and click on the selective color adjustment layer to select all three, and hit the delete key on the keyboard to delete them, or you can click and drag them onto the trash. And I'm gonna click on this composite folder, which shows the composite files that I used to create this image. And I'm just gonna delete that as well because we don't need it for what I'm gonna show you now. We can actually export this color grade as a LUT file and apply it to video using any of the applications that I mentioned, Premiere, SpeedGrade, or After Effects. But before we export the adjustments, we need to have a background. So go into Layer, New, Background from Layer. Notice that now it renames it background and it's got that little lock there. Now go into File, Export, Color Lookup Tables. And these are the options that you get. I'm gonna leave them all at default, but make sure that Cube is selected and then press OK. And I'm just gonna save it in the folder for this tutorial that I have in my computer. I'm calling it Cinematic Color Grading. Click on Save, and Photoshop is gonna save that lookup table. Now I can disable this Curves adjustment layer, and I can come in here and add a color lookup adjustment layer, and I can load a 3D LUT. And notice the file that I have here. I have a cinematic color grading.cube. I can click on that, click on load, and Photoshop is going to load that LUT file onto Photoshop. And notice that it's exactly the same adjustment that I created, but on one single color lookup adjustment. And I can take that same file and take it into Premiere, take it into SpeedGrade, or take it into After Effects and apply the color grade that I've created in Photoshop onto a video. I'm not gonna keep this adjustment layer for this tutorial because I don't really need it. I'm happy using the curves adjustment layers to create that effect, but it is the same effect. And another way that you can apply the color grade in Photoshop is by using a gradient map. And this doesn't work at all like the adjustment layers that we've been using, but I still think that it can help you create some pretty interesting color grades. So let me show you how to create one of those. I'm gonna click on the adjustment layer icon and select gradient map. By default, the gradient map uses a foreground and background color, but I'm gonna click on this down pointing arrow and simply select black and white. This is gonna turn the image, of course, black and white. I'm gonna double click on the gradient to bring up the gradient editor. And the way this works is very simple. It maps a color to your image based on the luminance values. So using black and white makes it really easy to understand. This color here on the left controls the darkest point. This color here on the right controls the lightest point. So if the darkest point is black, obviously the darkest point here will be black. If the lightest point is white, then the whitest point on the image will be white. But what if we choose different colors? For example, this preset here. Now the dark point is this purple. Notice how it's reflected here in the image. And the lightest point is now this orange. Notice how what used to be white in the image is now orange. And obviously the colors in between are a gradient in between those two colors. Now usually you don't get really good color grades just by selecting two colors and pressing OK. You have to use blend modes. So you can use a blend mode like overlay, soft light, color, just so you can better blend the colors with your image. And I'm just gonna leave it at normal for now. Click on this down pointing arrow and then click on the gear icon and notice all the different gradients that Photoshop gives us to work with. And the one we're looking for is called photographic toning. I'm gonna press OK to replace my default colors and I can see what these look like. Now these are not necessarily much better at first, but if I select one like this one here, I can come in and change the blend mode to something like soft light and notice the difference. This looks a lot more like the color grades that we have been applying, and I can select the different ones to help us find the appropriate color grade for our image. So something like this looks pretty good. And this is using soft light. I can try overlay, which is a stronger effect. And of course, color, but usually that doesn't work as well. Soft light is one of my favorites when using the photographic tonings under the gradient map. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. Make sure that you leave all your comments or questions down below. If you create an image using this tutorial or any other of my tutorials, feel free to share it on Instagram with the hashtag PTCvids. I often do a search for this hashtag to see what you're all up to. If I find your image, I will leave you a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click on that like button. If you have a friend who you think will enjoy this tutorial, please share this link with them now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.